time. And today is the 126th Security Thought Leadership webinar. And the idea of thought leadership is that we all play a role in critiquing what's going on today, thinking about how can we interpret today's trends, today's issues, today's happening, in order that we may lead to a better type of provision tomorrow. And the topic today is one that has emerged from previous webinars. It's about the fraud challenges in the public sector. In what ways are these changing, and how effective is the response? So we know in the press we've been hearing, and statistics are backing this up, fraud is a problem. Criminals have adapted quickly, and there are plenty of opportunities in COVID. They're just different. So what's been going on in the public sector? Well, today I've got three panelists who will be approaching this subject from very different angles. So in a minute, I'm going to invite each of them to introduce themselves. And once they've done that, I'll be coming back to each of them for their opening statement. And when they've done that, we'll be inviting you, the audience, to ask questions. Now, I would encourage you to get your questions in early. Use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen, and I will endeavour to incorporate it in the ensuing discussion. So without further ado then, let's go and meet our panel. And first of all, Marc. Marc, please introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you, Martin. My name is Marc McCauley. I'm a senior consultant at the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. I've been 26 years working in local government, public sector organisations, and since 2017, I've been working at CIPFA in their counter-fraud centre. CIPFA work with public sector organisations around the world to help implement counter-fraud delivery, robust counter-fraud and anti-corruption solutions. We work with offering guidance and advice, developing tools and training staff, and offer management levels of assurance on how their organisations are delivering against their objectives.
Thank you very much indeed, Marc. Let's go over to India to meet our second panellist, Praveen. Praveen, please introduce yourself.
Hello all, I'm Captain Praveen Patel. I'm the Managing Director and Founder of Inquest Advisories Private Limited. I'm a certified fraud examiner, certified international crime prevention specialist, and a certified anti-money laundering expert. I have over 15 years of corporate experience, in addition to my 6 years of stint with an artillery regiment of the Indian Army. And my work and expertise has been around forensic investigations and due diligence for private public enterprises. Thank you, Martin, for this opportunity. It is my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and very much looking forward to coming back to you in a minute. And finally, our third panellist, Helen, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Martin. Hello, everybody from a not so sunny Cheshire this afternoon. My name is Helen Peters. I'm the fraud manager at Cheshire West and Chester Council. And I've worked for Cheshire West and Chester Council since its inception in 2009. I am more of a fraud practitioner. So I manage a very small team of investigators, as in only one at the moment. And again, hopefully today it's to talk about sort of the impact really around, particularly around COVID and the fraud side and the involvement that we've had there. Thank you, Martin.
Excellent, Helen. Just what we do want. So without further ado then, as you know, if you've attended the first 125 webinars, and I expect you all have, you'll know that what we do now is we go to the panelists and we invite them to make an opening statement, 3 minutes, where they get to say whatever they want to about this topic. So let's go to Marc. Marc, your opening statement, please.
It can always be dangerous, and I'm glad it's limited to 3 minutes because I can talk for Great Britain on this subject sometimes. Fraud, anti-fraud, anti-corruption in the public sector has been changing for many, many years. We've experienced the introduction of new technology over the last sort of 20 years, and that's building at pace the tools and the services that are available to the public sector to not only counter fraud, but implement new ways of working within the organisation. And actually these seminars, these webinars give us an opportunity to actually talk to each other and understand what the implications are, what is actually happening on the ground level. We all know that the COVID has had a major impact. It's probably accelerated digital transformation massively. Things that we're planning over the next 5 to 10 years have probably been implemented over the course of the last year to 18 months, and organisations have had to embrace new technology. But with that, what does it bring? It brings access to new services, new funds, new grants, new payments, etc. Not just the delivery of them, but how the public and your customers apply, the way that they access your services, the way that they obtain benefits and grants and finances and service delivery. And actually, it means that we have to look at these new ways of working. What are we doing? What prevention are we implementing? Are we embedding in these systems? What due diligence is being done to make sure these systems are fit for purpose before we roll them out? We've all seen the negative press around the way that maybe grants are administered for business rates recently, but when you're delivering at pace, sometimes you have to take shortcuts. And what you don't want to do is introduce a way of working that actually creates bigger opportunity for fraud. And then we have to look at fraud versus corruption. Our staff are now working remotely. They're now using technology they've never used before, working in a way they've never used before, working from home with less supervision in new roles, working in new teams, new ways of working. And we have to have that level of trust in our staff that they are doing the job to the best of their ability in the circumstances. But it does actually introduce more opportunity that we need to be aware of and actually think about, and hope that our staff and our ways of working don't create the opportunity and the motive to commit fraud against the organisations that we work for.
Yeah, really interesting, Mark. Thank you very much. Well, plenty of stuff to come back to. Just to say to the audience, if you'd like to get your questions in, use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll endeavour to incorporate it in the ensuing discussion. Okay, without further ado, let's go back to India and ask Praveen. Praveen, your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Martin. Well, it's a known fact when it comes to public sector frauds that the origin of public sector frauds is both internally as well as from the external sources. Recently, the Reserve Bank of India released some reports for the financial year 2020, and as per which the cases of fraud at banks and the financial institutions have increased by 28% in volume terms and 159% in value terms. And interesting to note is that the public sector accounted for more than 50% of these frauds. And therefore, my focus primarily remains upon the PSPs, and in that too, the internal sources which are responsible for these frauds. Now, speaking of fraud in the public sector, concerns like bribery, corruption, and misuse of authority are more or less the same as to the private sector, but with a significant difference. And the difference is around the approach towards these concerns and the effectiveness of the internal controls which are there in the private and the public sector, if at all the controls are implemented. And again, something common in both private and public sector is the fact that these frauds are committed largely in a manner that there are either nil or minimal financial or documentary trails. Now, most of these dealings are in cash, making it difficult to detect until there is some tip or some complaint or discovery over a period of time through some external unbiased audits of the financial reviews that happens. And typically to India, our biggest challenge has been against, when it comes to against fraud in the public sector, can rightly be summed up, I would say, in PAD, which is a short form of three major issues that are there. First is the P for political will. Sadly, one after the other, Indian governments have used public sector banks and other institutions as a political instrument to roll out their populist programs, which either did not pay back or were overturned by the succeeding governments. So has been the case with the second piece, which is the accountability. So PAD is political will, A for accountability, and D is due diligence, as Marc covered that piece. So in terms of accountability also, which has been a major area of concern, unlike the private sector, which are profit driven and the accountability piece is strictly monitored, PSPs have suffered for quite a long time due to poor accountability and the governance. And finally is the poor due diligence processes. It's rather simple, straight, but really unfortunate that there are so many vested interests which are benefiting from this ongoing chaos. And that's the reason that the resistance to any kind of reform in this sector is bound to be high. And that's precisely the case with our sector in India. So that's more or less the opening statement, Martin, from my end.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interested to see how it's markedly different. Thank you very much indeed for that. And now to Helen. Helen, welcome, and your opening statement, please.
Thank you. I think my opening statement really is very much build on what Marc has just said. I can honestly say that the last 15 months of my life, it has been all-consuming with the business grants that we've been paying out, and it has been that pressure to pay. You know, me and my team have very much been on the ground of that, and have seen where the incidents of fraud have come in. And it has all been pushed online. Things have been, you know, we've been under pressure to pay. We've been under pressure from both government and local government, you know, to get those payments out of the door, balancing that against due diligence, you know, prepayment. So again, it has pushed the fraud online. In some ways, it has made it easier because there has been no face-to-face. I also think, again, building on the fact that staff overnight, we started working from home. You know, it speeded things up. I mean, we were fortunate in our local authority that to a certain extent we had rolled out a certain amount of home working. So we already had certain facilities there. You know, we had certain things in place. Obviously, overnight, everybody went home. It impacted on the fraud investigation side because clearly face-to-face interviews went out the window. Staff got seconded to other areas. You know, similarly, we got seconded really into the business rates team to deliver those business rate grants. So really, it's definitely been a balancing act for us. You know, it has had a huge impact. Things like procurement. You know, thinking about procurement, we've taken on new suppliers, again, balancing that against due diligence. And again, we're under pressure to you know, to find supplies, PPE, for example. So again, it's about that, you know, balancing really due diligence, balancing the fact that we are still looking for fraud and we know that fraud exists, you know, and balancing that against the need to get people paid and to keep the business running and to keep the business operational.
Helen, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate it. Look, three fascinating insights in some of the realities of the sharp end. And let's go to our questions now. And I'm going to go to Marc Bishop, who's asked a question. I'm going to come to you first, Marc. Then I'll ask for your comments, Helen. And then I'm going to ask Praveen to interpret this in an India context. So this is the question, Marc, and the question is, do the panelists think the new government counter-fraud standards are useful and moving in the right direction to streamline efforts in the public sector, or are they a distraction? And should more effort be made into closer operational working across all public sector bodies to identify and tackle fraud? So first of all, Marc, can you just explain a little bit about these standards? Because not everyone around the world will know what they are. And secondly, is that the right way to go? And I'll get Helen to comment, and then I'll ask Praveen to give us an India context. So Marc first, please.
So in the interest of full disclosure, I sit on the cross-sector advisory panel for the Cabinet Office, representing my organisation, SITFA, and working with members across the public sector and private sector, training organisations, etc., on the development of these standards, and in particular for the development of the counter-fraud profession that central government Cabinet Office are rolling out. Now, for me, I wouldn't invest my time and effort in something that I didn't think was beneficial to organisations in steering the way forward for counter-fraud. And the government counter-fraud standards are being developed to create a minimum standard, an expected standard, or what we consider to be an industry standard of best practice on how organisations should work towards A, protecting their organisation in the first place from fraud and corruption, and B, if there are instances reported, how they go and investigate and take people to task and sanction, etc. Now, without a set of standards, and bear in mind, these aren't the only set of standards available. The Fighting Fraud and Corruption Locally Board, which I'm also a member of, created a strategy and some standards and expectations around best practice that helps local government in particular, but public sector organisations, look at what is available, what strategies there are, what best practice there is, look at case studies, and understand what organisations are doing to tackle fraud, how we can all learn from each other. And if we come up with a set of minimum standards, it allows organisations to measure their own performance against those standards, identify areas for improvement, identify weaknesses, and actually identify some good best practice that they can lend and maybe work together, share services, and improve the way that fraud is tackled across the public sector as a whole. So yes, I think that they are useful. They're certainly moving in the right direction in the sense that they're being developed in a very methodic way by professionals, you know, with the correct skill sets, and they are being, you know, they're not just being rolled out. Central government aren't just dictating to local government and the rest of the public sector. They're actually working together to come up with meaningful standards that work, that are transferable across all public sector organisations.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me come to Helen now. Helen, in a previous webinar, which we ran about standards, one of the comments that came out of this was wrong time to be introducing standards. We got our back to the wall. People can say what they like. We got to get on with the day job, and I'm afraid it's just the wrong thing to do at this moment in time, with any expectation. Where do you stand on that, Helen?
I mean, what Marc said, absolutely, you know, I agree with that. And generally, I think that anything that raises the profile of fraud is, in my book, is, you know, absolutely fine. I think a lot of local authorities are set up, in fact, every local authority is probably set up differently when it comes to their response to fraud. So again, having some sort of industry standard that you know, that can be adapted, shall we say, because again, each local authority would probably use it differently. Is it ever the right time? You know, for anything, I would say, you know, we keep coming back to COVID. You know, COVID has had just a massive impact on everything we do. I think we are coming out the other side, or it's beginning to feel like we're coming out the other side. I am beginning for the first time in 15 months to start looking at actually what is my day job. So, you know, those sort of things, that there will be a time and a place for them. And again, it will be up to each local authority. If they roll it out to local authorities, it'll be up to each local authority to sort of take it on board as they will.
Okay, but I mean, just from your point of view, I'm interested in this sense of standards as a point of principle. Would you say that, taken an India context, this is a good route to go down? I mean, because any point in doing them if people are going to use them and they're going to be meaningful. Praveen, your thoughts?
Martin, when it comes to India, or even for that matter globally also, my personal experience has been that the concern areas are not around the standards. The concern area is more around implementation and the human angle which gets involved in this. And there is a three-phased approach that we usually recommend, and we've seen more effective, which is proactive, interventional, and reactive approach. So these three phases are there when it comes to the proactive piece, that what standards, how the standards are able to help us in proactively identifying the opportunities that are there, and interventional measures wherein the standards are how they are able to support us in intervening in the situations where the frauds are occurring, and we are able to contain the losses as early as possible, and then get into the reactive approach of conducting effective investigations. So in the recent past also, we have seen that majorly the concern has been around implementation of these standards. Yes, standards are useful, as well as they have their own role to play, but it is more around, we've had many scams in the past, and primarily the reason behind those have been the deviations that are there, which are given by the middle management of the senior management of various public sector enterprises who are there.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense to me. Now, we might well come back to this, but let me move on. And just to remind the audience, if you'd like to use the question answer button at the bottom of your screen, we'll endeavour to incorporate your question in. Marc, another Marc sent me a question. And his point is, could I ask the panel, is this, and perhaps you've all alluded to this, but let me ask it direct. The concern is that, Marc, right now, everyone's had their head down doing the job. As we get back to work, we are about to discover a monumental crisis in terms of fraud. That the trouble is that is unnoticed at the moment. And when it comes to the fore, it will be monumental and it will be embarrassing and undermining for the public sector. Marc, reasonable or unreasonable?
It's very reasonable. There's always cycles of scrutiny, for want of a better term, in the sense that things happen. Let's say you pick a particular area of work in a particular local organisation that develops a fund and a practice. It rolls out an innovative idea that's publicly funded. There will be someone that will, after the event, scrutinise how it was developed, how it was delivered, and actually ask pertinent questions around how their public money was spent on that initiative. Now, that's taken a very small programme in a locality. And what COVID has done is that's extrapolated it massively, because each organisation, but as the public sector as a whole, went into crisis management. We had to find ways to deliver, as Helen said, PPE, for instance. And we've all heard the nightmare stories around contracts that have been awarded around PPE. And actually, someone is going to scrutinise the circumvention of procurement procedure rules. And we know that there was an emergency, and we know that there were probably emergency powers delegated by central government to go off and award contracts. But has that been misused in any way? And there will be those that scrutinise, that attend cabinet committees that are public, that will ask those questions, that will expect answers, that will do freedom of information requests and try and uncover what an organisation has done. And even if it was done for the right reason, in the best possible way at the time, any breaches of particular rules, any lower than expected standards of behaviour will be questioned. And that's what we need to expect going forward, and quite rightly so. As public sector organisations, we need to be scrutinised to ensure that we are delivering for the public.
Okay, and Helen, from your point of view, are you expecting us to, I don't mean in Cheshire, I mean generally, us to uncover a monumental hole in public finances from fraud that we haven't yet discovered? Indeed, would you say it was inevitable that's going to happen?
Yeah, I would. I agree absolutely. With Marc, I'm getting a bit boring now, aren't I? I keep agreeing with Marc. But yes, I really don't think that at this moment in time, they do not understand the full extent of fraud that is in the system. I mean, I can only talk from what I have seen locally, but if you roll what I've seen locally out nationally across all local authorities, then, you know, there is a lot of fraud in the system. And again, picking up what Marc said, really, as local authorities, we were firefighting. You know, lots of things were dropped on us by central government, who changed the rules for schemes, changed the rules, etc., quite often, shall we say. You know, and expected us to pick it up, run with it. You know, whether that is paying out people or whether that is getting PPE or as well as doing the day job. I think once, you know, we get a bit of normality, you know, if you know, when we go back to that sense of normality, and we are looking back at doing our day job, our proper day job, then yes, I think we'll find a lot. And it won't just be, it'll be right across the public sector. It'll be, I mean, there's been a lot of publicity about furlough fraud, a lot of publicity about the help out to eat out fraud. So yes, I think it'll be massive.
Okay, and you're in your opening statement, Praveen, one of the things that you mentioned rather interestingly was the Bank of India report, which said public sector fraud to make up just over half of that fraud. Can we expect when we get out of COVID that would you expect that to be even more dramatic? Thinking of India now, even more dramatic, dramatically high? Are we in India too about to discover a monumental great big hole?
So, Martin, it's both ways. I mean, agreeing to Marc and Helen, what they have shared. In addition to that, the problem with the public sector banks in India has been around NPAs, the non-performing assets that have been there. And that has been a recurring problem for the banks, for the PSPs for quite some time. COVID is only going to add to it because of the crisis that is there. So a lot of people have gone under the economic crisis. They are not able to pay off their loans. So this problem is, of course, going to increase manyfold. It has already started. The traces are already there. So yes, PSP area of fraud that's already there. That crisis is already there. But in addition to that, the other the monumental crisis, as you said, is of course there in terms of the procurement frauds that are there. And it is currently, we were still under that firefighting mode, as Helen said, and that has been the case for the past 1 year. In the second wave, we know the way procurements were made. Same happened last year also. And all these procurements, all the controls that are supposed to be there in place, nothing could be implemented because of the situations or the conditions that were there. But yes, a stage will come where we will start figuring out what went wrong and what all frauds have taken place during this entire process.
And Praveen, in response, do you think that public sector officials can be blamed in the sense that, hold on, you're paid from the state to look after the state's interests? To what extent is it reasonable to say, but hold on a minute, this was a time of crisis, you have to expect that there will be consequences in terms of fraud? Is that a reasonable response, or might the public be expected to say it should never have happened in the first place?
I didn't get you, Martin. You're trying to say that.
So here's what I'm trying to understand. So I understand your point that because things happen quickly, controls weren't always there, that we can expect more fraud. My point is, to what extent can public officials reasonably say it wasn't our fault, we were acting under pressure to get things done quickly in difficult circumstances? Is that a reasonable defense or not?
That has always happened, as Marc very clearly said. Anything. This is one of the basic red flags in fraud, that any procurement or any decision which is taken under pressure. So there is a justification to give at a later stage that there was a need of the hour, and that's why these procurements were made. But yes, if the as I said, if the reactive piece, which is the investigation piece, if that is done diligently, then there are ways to fix the accountability on the public sector employees. But it becomes very difficult because, as I said, the political will that is there, because most of these things are done with hand in gloves with the senior management or the leadership that is there. So it becomes very difficult at that point in time even to initiate a very unbiased investigation to what to say then about fixing the accountabilities.
Okay, and Praveen, let me just stay with you. A question from Keith Nielsen. And Keith says, okay, accept the fact this may have happened. You mentioned internal and external fraud. Would you expect them to be equally as problematic, or might you expect one to be more of a problem than the other because of COVID? I'm talking now.
So internal sources are much more dangerous than the external ones, because internally is where as we say, the insider threat is the biggest threat, and the people who are sitting within the PSPs or the public sector enterprises, they are posing a much bigger risk than the external sources. And there are multiple ways, like starting from procurement fraud to asset misappropriation. There are multiple ways how the internal sources or the internal insider threats are going to, impact the public sector enterprises. So of course, I mean that is a clear demarcation that the internal sources are much more dangerous than the external ones.
Interesting. Thank you. Let me go to Helen and Marc then on this same point. Helen, would you agree? Would you expect internal fraud to be a public sector? I'm talking about now, to be the main problem here, or external?
To me at the moment, I mean, again, I can only talk from my experience and what I've dealt with, but for me at the moment, it's definitely external. And that is just sheer volume of what we've been dealing with, and sheer volume from the amount of people that we've been dealing with. I mean, we may have staffing numbers of around 3,000, probably less than 3,000. If you compare that alone to the fact that we've had probably 15,000 applications for business grants. So for us, it's a sheer numbers game at the moment.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. And just to say to the audience, and I'll come to Mark, but just to say to the audience, if you'd like to ask a question, please use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen, because that's the one I can see. Use question and answer, and I endeavour to incorporate it. Mark, yeah, I mean, internal, external. I'm interested in your thoughts on this. What's your sense, since we don't know?
I'm going to agree with Helen. Helen, it's only because I was going before you that you're always agreeing with me. I'm agreeing with Helen. Externally, will be bigger volume based, because obviously your interactions with the public has been increased tenfold with COVID and new schemes, new services, new grants, etc. However, value wise, it might actually be the internal frauds that are more damaging, not just because they could be bigger in terms of financial, but it's the reputational damage that comes with it. It's the organisational disruption that you then have to deal with to plug the gap, to work towards restoring public faith in the services that you deliver and the way that you're protecting their funds. So that's all something that needs to be thought about. I did also want to just touch on something that came up earlier that I wanted to go back to. When we were talking about the working at pace, the lack of due diligence and the risks that are facing the organisation to deliver, particularly things like grants that were thrust upon them by central government. And what Praveen said about the red flags. We're pretty sure in the very early planning stages, although it was done at pace, the red flags were known, and there was a certain element or level of fraud that was factored into schemes and the delivery of these schemes. But what the public sector practitioners are worried about, those that actually rolled out the schemes, is the blame. If there's been fraud, who's going to be held accountable? Our central government going to accuse local government of failing in their due diligence before making payments? Or are central government going to take the responsibility for rushing out initiatives and actually asking local government to deliver? And there's another thing across the public sector that we also need to be wary of or think about is post-event activity assurance. We know that something's happened. We know that there's been a scheme that's been rolled out with a lack of due diligence. What's being done to offer your senior members and your senior managers a level of assurance that we'll look at what happened, we'll look at how it was delivered, and offer a level of assurance that there has not been the type of fraud that we're scared of occurring. That was just me from going back on that last point.
Yeah, no, thank you very much indeed, and interesting. But look, the questions are coming in, so I'm gonna go through these. There's some really good points being made. Let me come to you first, Praveen, if I might, and Rajiv, former Rajiv Martha, who's a former panelist on himself. Makes an point about the online fraud. Okay, a lot of stuff's going online. His question about given the amount of data spread across the crowd, what is the highest risk? Financial fraud, IP, data? Can we? I suppose you're going to say they're all in danger of going up. Is there one of those we should look to say that's where I would look first?
Yeah, before I come to Rajiv's question, I'll just add one point to what Marc said, the volume and the value piece. As I mentioned in the earlier piece also, that the value-wise impact is very high, and that's why I chose insider sources. A small example that I can share here is that a disgruntled middle management bank employee who received only one promotion in his 36 years of career in the bank costed $2 billion to that bank. That is the impact, that is the level of volume. And this was the case of Nirav Modi. which is very well known to the whole world. So now coming back to Rajiv's point, yes, when it comes to the online frauds, and specifically, I was focusing more on the insider sources. And when we say insider sources, that also becomes a part of all of these problems put together. Yes, the data or the information leakages or the information which is available is a big risk, is the biggest risk, in fact. So picking or choosing one out of all these is really difficult as of now. But I would say, I mean, I try to sum it up saying that no, insider threat is what I usually pick up. An insider threat could be in any form, like I said, a disgruntled employee didn't get due promotion or didn't get got the time. It could be an employee from IT who might leak out the entire data. So these are the areas where I would say the risk or the concern areas are more than any external attacks, because usually the focus is more around that. And banks or most of the public sector enterprises, even private sector, is usually prepared for these attacks or these frauds. But it is the insider sources which are usually companies or the enterprises are complicit about.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much indeed. Helen, let me come to you. And I've got a different question now. It's an interesting one, I might add. And we've had previous webinars when we've looked at ideas for crime prevention. And one of them has been about incentivizing good practice, by incentivizing, not just saying it's a good thing, but making it happen. And Ivan Bradshaw says, does the panel feel that incentivizing positive outcomes from fraud investigations, government-funded financial rewards, would help drive up levels of sanctions being taken against individuals who defraud the public sector? Your thoughts?
My thoughts, double-edged sword, really. Something that used to happen many years ago, as I recall. Maybe Marc will recall that as well. Yes, it can drive up sanctions, because ultimately, let's be honest, local authorities have no money. If they thought that this would be another form of income, but then that would have to be balanced against the fact that, could it be classed as unethical? Because basically you're being rewarded in some respects for maybe prosecuting somebody or taking somebody down that sanction route. So yeah, I'm not against it, but I think it's something that has to be thought out very, very carefully. And again, goes back to everything we've talked about today, really, about due diligence and checks. And I think there'd have to be some serious sort of controls in place to make sure that that is not abused.
But Marc, it would be, wouldn't it?
Yes, definitely, 100%. And I'm only talking through experience. And again, agreeing with Helen. So incentivization certainly has its place. It's certainly there to push initiatives and reward positive actions. But when we look at history, the public sector, local government had weekly benefit saving incentives when they used to detect benefit fraud and stop benefit fraud. But because it was such a money-making scheme, there was never any further action to take sanction action against those individuals. You'd stop the benefit, you'd got your incentive. There's no point in spending, valuable resources taking further action. That was quickly, or not necessarily quickly, but that was identified, and then an alternative incentivization scheme come in that actually took away that incentivization to stop fraud. But actually, yes, you're right. It was like a £2,000 payment for prosecuting someone, or £1,200 for issuing a fine, a penalty, or a warning. But then equally that stopped, because whenever you incentivize something, the focus is on that one particular thing. And whilst the focus was on prosecuting and sanctioning, are you ever really going to focus on preventing fraud if the reward is actually stopping it and prosecuting people? So what we need is really an incentivization for public sector to prevent fraud. And if there is a way of being able to measure the level of fraud you've prevented, or showing the success of a scheme you've introduced to prevent fraud, actually incentivizing organisations to do that, to take on more staff to prevent fraud, then I think that's the way forward. It certainly has its place.
Okay. Of course, the other thing you could do is you could enter them for a Tackling Economic Crime Award, a TECA. That's the other thing to do.
Definitely.
Let me come to Praveen, if I might, because I'm keen to get another question in. We're running out of time, folks, by the way. Praveen, procurement fraud, this was mentioned about, and the idea is that this is going to be a particular problem. You can imagine, it's not difficult to imagine the problems here, okay? Do you see this as being a particularly big issue? And I guess the point is, Praveen, is given that it's sort of inevitable, if you're doing things quickly, this is the area that's going to get attacked, inevitable. Do you think that the proper thought process was given to the dangers, accepting it had to be done quickly? Your thoughts, sir, Praveen?
Martin, procurement fraud has always been crucial in every way, and it is extremely difficult to detect. So I've seen, while working with various organizations, that starting from the step where the pre-selection of vendors happens, till the contract awarding, and even finally till the execution of the project, at every stage there is a possibility that the fraud has happened, and in some way or the other that project might be impacted. Starting from bid rigging at the beginning of the project awarding, later on it could be substandard material that is being supplied by the vendor. There could be mischarging, there could be wrong information that is provided about the prices, multiple such issues. The vendors who qualify, manipulating that information. So there are at least, the countless scenarios how procurement fraud can be executed, and the repercussions are severe. It again varies from project to project. We have had a very shameful incident of a bridge, footover bridge collapsing within 12 or 15 days during the Commonwealth Games in 2010, which was a very shameful incident. Now, there are these such incidents because now if you look back, I don't know whether the investigation was done in that case or not, but yes, these are the kind of incidents when it comes to public sector enterprises.
Interesting. Got a comment here from Andrea Nietzsche, and she says Germany has a huge fraud-related COVID problem, starting with MPs earning millions by ordering overpriced face masks, to test centres claiming money for thousands of tests that were never done, to non-existing companies putting in claims for state support. The German Ministry of Health is one big mess where the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. I think there will be some reckoning next year, but it won't be a big one. And I guess that many countries will worry about this. With these thoughts in mind, I want to ask you each for one final comment, and you got just 20 seconds each. We're running out of time. And I'd like to know that given where we are now, given this, we're hopefully getting to the end of COVID, getting to the new era, what's the single biggest focus of the public sector should it be in terms of tackling fraud? So let me go first, Marc. Single biggest focus, 20 seconds if you wouldn't mind, Marc, public sector fraud.
I think it's going to be getting your house in order. Actually, if we're going to go back to, I don't think we're ever going to go back to how we used to work, but actually we're going to need to use the data that we've gathered, services that we've provided, and the information that we've got to actually look internally and see if there has been fraud against your organisation, closing the loopholes, making sure that it can't happen again in the future, and dealing with it adequately, and publicising it and celebrating success, that we can all learn from each other and make sure that we can share best practice.
Okay, thank you. Praveen, same to you. 20 seconds, headline strategic issue. What should be the focus?
Martin, the focus for public sector enterprises in India is act or perish. And most of the PSPs have already failed to act in the past, and they've reached a stage where the current government, as per their overhauling program of this sector, they are slashing their numbers from 27 to 12. That is already happening. And as per as if I can quote a senior financial journalist who says that the public sector banks in India have already lived their life. And so for me, privatization, and many of these banks are also marked for privatization, but privatization and mergers may appear to be a solution to begin with, but it's not really, until and unless there are proper implementation of effective controls, as I said, proactive, interactive, and the reactive approaches which are there. Till then, I don't think even these solutions are going to work. Okay, thank you very much. And just 20 seconds, Helen, very, very quickly, headline issue, what should be the focus?
For us, it's definitely going to be, I think, a programme of post assurance to, root out any fraud that's in there, and also making sure that where we have maybe things have slipped because of COVID and because of speed and because of pressure, there's, once we're back into normality, then those things shouldn't be slipping any longer. And we should be looking to go back and go, actually, let's get back to what we used to do.
Thank you very much indeed. Panel, thank you very much indeed. We could have gone on. It's one of those topics that's so big in its consequences. Thank you very much indeed to all of you. And thank you very much indeed for the questions. And some of you have been sending me some comments as well. And we'll try and incorporate those in a blog that will go on the website tomorrow, a copy with recording of this webinar. A few final comments, just to let you know, there's a study going on with my colleague Janice Goldstraw-White, ACFE UK chapter fraud advisory panel, and the survey is barriers to the mandatory reporting of fraud, finding solutions, sharing best practice. Love to have your views. If you go to the Perpetuity website and complete the survey, 10 minutes, give us your views on that, please, if you wouldn't mind. OSPA entries are open in the US, but close on the 1st of July. Benelux close on the 4th of July. Kenya on the 9th of July. Come on, get your entries in. Germany, Norway, and Romania, you've got a bit more time, just a bit more. And the Tackling Economic Crime Awards nominations are open in the UK. Get your entries in. And the Cyber OSPAs are open all around the world. The Cyber OSPAs, the chance to get global recognition for cyber good practice. They're the categories. These are all the associations. Come and join us on a massive, massive award gala that will be happening in December. Cyber OSPAs, look out for those. And finally, to say we're going through it all again next week. On Tuesday, we've got criminologists coming in to talk about the crime rates. They'll be saying what's been going on. Quite surprising what's been going on, actually. So hear from criminologists on Tuesday. And on Wednesday, we've got a webinar about Nigeria and the presentation of the Nigerian OSPAs. That's 4 o'clock on Wednesday. And just a note, on the 8th of July, Janice is standing in for me and is running a webinar on is fraud purely an opportunistic crime? And she's going to be arguing, I think, that maybe not. So if you'd like to be part of that, let us know. Other than that, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thanks once again to the panel. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to Christine Brooks and Hannah Miller in the background. And I hope to see you next Tuesday, if not before, and wherever you are in the world. Until we meet again, stay safe.